So this is our official second episode then.
Ah, right. Okay. We on number 2 already.
Yeah.
Gosh. So what's this one about? Tell people what this is
So
about.
I thought today would be fitting to talk about how we think, or in our own personal experience, people could connect with their fathers, have better relationships with their papas, daddies.
Okay. Yeah. So it's about improving. Is this specifically child-daughter relationships, or should I talk about my own?
You can talk about your own too. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know if the dynamic is different from father to son and father to daughter dynamics.
I'm sure there must be different dynamics, and I guess one of the reasons I started by asking the question is, um, to a certain extent, I guess that if you want to improve that kind of relationship, father-daughter relationship or father-son relationship, both have got to have open minds and a willingness to do it. And I say that because in relation to my own father, and I'm not criticizing him as a father, it's just the way he was. I don't think he was the kind of person that really even ever thought about our relationship very much.
As in, but I think we've said this before where we kind of said, but he probably thought his job as a father at the time was to provide for the family, not necessarily
That's true.
provide
That's true.
emotionally. So I think he thought financially providing was what he did, and not necessarily providing emotional support.
That's
the
possibly
kids.
true. Obviously, when I was growing up and my mother was still alive, but don't forget, Granddad, my father, your granddad, lived for getting on for 30 odd years after my mother died. Lived on his own, and it's not. I don't think that he still reached out in order to form a particular relationship. And he cared about his children, and he particularly cared about his grandchildren. But I don't think he ever really went out of his way, if you see what I mean. It was all very much up to us to make the running within the relationship.
I think that's a difficult thing for kids to deal with, because I think, not that it's unnatural, but I think it feels difficult for kids to be the ones trying to make a connection with the parents, because I think you almost feel like, hang on a minute, you're my parent.
Yeah.
You should be the one
And I think that's true almost sometimes regardless of what age you are.
Yeah.
I know certainly, one or two times in my life before you were born, when I felt I was going through a rough patch for whatever reason, and I kind of just wanted my father to reach out to me, and he just never did. I just wanted him to show some understanding of what I was experiencing, but it just wasn't there.
Yeah. And I think it's quite a common thing though, which I think that communication comes possibly after kind of mending that kind of...
So what do you mean by that, mending? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think if there's such a big distance or, communication gap, if it's quite difficult for both sides to pick up the phone or go and see.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you mean now.
Difficult.
Yeah, and in that sense, it's also about expectation. You see, because, as I've mentioned before, when I grew up, my mother was, very much the head of the family in an emotional sense, and therefore, I felt that I'd almost gone through 20 odd years of my life without really knowing my father very much. So by the time my mother died, there was so much of a void to bridge.
Yeah. But I think it's only natural for kids to crave and want communication from their parents.
So how do we help people who want a better relationship, particularly daughters with their father? because as you've said before, maybe your natural inclination is to go to your mother and talk to your mother about, things that are going in your life. So why, why'd you cut your father out?
Well, I think one thing was mum would make me, she'd say, okay, you should call your dad and let him know. And I'd say, no, I can't do that. And she'd say, no, he's your dad too. And he wouldn't necessarily, if you don't live in the same household, you don't know what's going on. So even though you want him to reach out, you need to let him know so that then he will reach out, if that makes sense. Because, there's so far the parenting instinct can go. You can't just think, oh my God, she's in trouble, I'm going to call her up right now if I haven't said anything.
Yeah.
And I think, especially, I can't remember how old I was in the teens, an angsty teen. I think it was mum that kind of insinuated, okay, fine, if you feel that you don't have a relationship, then what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, it's not my job to do anything about it, is it? I can't go to the UK every week, or I can't, and she said, well, yeah, but you can Skype once a week, and you can hold each other accountable that you are going to talk once a week. And yeah, I think.
But is there a danger that, and here we're talking about obviously children who are estranged for whatever reason from their parent or one of their parents, that there's a danger that then somehow that becomes not a burden, but it's like, oh God, I've got to phone my father. It's almost then becomes potentially a negative thing.
It can do. I think it's I think like all human relationships, one problem with, I think, parent and child is that there's big expectations, maybe from both. And I think, obviously not all parents are good parents, and sometimes it's best for yourself, the child, to actually completely disconnect. Some families are problematic and parents can be problematic, and sometimes no contact or no relationship is actually what is best for you to heal and deal, if that makes sense.
But it's got to get, presumably, to quite an extreme point.
Yeah.
When you feel that no contact is actually best. I can think of instances where that might be the case, but we're meant to. I worry that we're straying away a little bit, because we're meant to be trying to talk about how we improve relationships, and we talked perhaps a little bit too much about where relationships don't work. So what makes them work?
Okay, I would say as a child that even though it almost feels not wrong, but you almost don't want to do it, I'd say initiate contact. And I think it's true for both sides, for both.
Obviously, yeah.
It doesn't take anything to send a text saying, what you up to?
Mm-hmm.
Love you, what you doing? Miss
So,
you.
Okay, a straightforward question. What could I have done better or differently?
Yeah, but when are we talking about?
Oh, blimey. Well, at times when you felt you needed a relationship with your father.
I don't know. I think the thing is, I think it's communication. I think, and I'm thinking out loud, which is why I keep saying I think. But I almost wonder if it's what we're doing, discussing uncomfortable things, rather than.
And so be prepared
Yeah.
to talk about the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, because relationships aren't always a bed of roses, so to speak. If you kind of think that the relationship is always going to be happy, jolly, positive, that's not the way the world works, because, there'll be times when you have anxiety about certain things and I don't understand or know about that. And of course, it works the other way around. I mean, you may sometimes say, "Oh, well, I didn't want to talk to me about this," and your mother was sort of saying, "Oh, well, you ought to." But I barely told you about some of the crap that was going on in my life, at certain times when you were growing up. And that's partly, and that's a deliberate thing. I think, like many fathers or parents, deliberately hid things from you on the basis that, well, I don't want to bore you with my shit, because I saw that as being irresponsible.
Yeah,
if you see what I mean.
do think that is true, though. That, sometimes a child should not be burdened with all their parents' worries.
But where do we draw the line? Because at one level, if you're hiding so much about what's going on and your fears and then your anxieties from your children or from your child, to what extent does that then itself become a problem, if you see what I mean?
I don't know. I think psychologists will probably know exactly what age, because I think a lot of kids then take on extra responsibility and grow up faster than they should. So I don't think it's a wrong thing to hide stuff from kids, because they are just kids, and you should let.
Well, we see it as from a parental point of view. I see it as protecting, but there's a danger that if you cut them off too much from the reality of what's going on in your life, it ceases to be protection and more of a barrier, I guess, is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, maybe. But what I was trying to say is that as the parent, they have to ask the kid the uncomfortable questions.
Sure.
So I would take it the other way around, as in, like, say, I'll try and think of an example. I think, for example, when I'd say last year of school and first year of university, when I think my anxiety was quite bad. High, and I wouldn't discuss it at all.
But I could see that. Well, I could sense that, if that's the right word, and I would try and get you to talk about it. But you equally, again, it's where you draw the line, because it's one thing trying to get you to talk about it, but one that, if that then looks as though you're putting pressure, then it's detrimental. And it's knowing where the boundary is between putting pressure on somebody to talk about something they don't want to talk about and letting them know that you're available to listen if they do want to talk about it. It's a fine line to tread, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, but then you have to, but some people aren't comfortable enough to talk about something uncomfortable like that when they see that something's wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can sense something's wrong. And of course, then the danger is that the parent worries potentially unduly that, oh my God, what are they going through? Because then the parent feels helpless, possibly hopeless as well, because they don't know how to help, because they don't actually know what the problem is, because the problem's not being articulated.
Yeah, and that's why
So it's like a vicious circle.
Yeah, which is where I think I'm not too sure what it is, but it takes something for the kids to feel comfortable to just blurt out whatever's on their mind.
But do you think then more kids should do that?
Yeah.
But, well, they should have the confidence that their parent will listen.
Yeah.
That's the point, because there's no point if they blurt it out once and the parent just says, so?
Yeah.
Then they're never going to do it again.
Yeah. Or at least, if you're seeing your kid struggling, maybe at least, I don't know, you could offer. I think that's the thing with having the uncomfortable conversation, is the uncomfortable conversation might be, I can see this. I understand if you don't want to talk to me, but you could talk to someone else. We
Absolutely.
could find help. We could do this. But that alone is quite uncomfortable to do.
Mm.
So I think that's part of an uncomfortable conversation to have.
Yeah.
I think the main thing for me to have a better relationship is honesty and communication.
There's one other thing, of course, that we perhaps should point out to anyone that's listening. Maybe one of the reasons that we're emphasizing the parent-child relationship here is because you don't have any siblings, you don't have any brothers and sisters, you're an only child. And of course, only children are increasingly in number. You know, more families only have one child than they've ever done in history. But the point I'm trying to labour here very badly is that in some instances you might have talked to your brother or sister, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
But you, of course, it's all totally hypothetical because you don't have a brother and sister. But the point is that
I think it's easier
being
maybe
an
if you're
only
able to
child,
confide
you know,
to
might have a
siblings.
particular problem. You
Yeah.
know, because you've got no one.
Which is why I think, in a sense, I was lucky enough that I confided in Mum for a lot of things. So she would sometimes, I don't know how, but she has the balance of being able to be there to confide like a kind of older sibling, but also be strict like a mother,
Right.
if that makes sense. Which can be very tricky to find.
It is
the
tricky,
balance.
and sometimes I think parents
Lose respect, I think.
well, because they, at one level, they want to be like your best friend and your best mate, but they also have to be an authoritarian figure as well.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to be both.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you know, I'm never going to be your best mate because, you know, I'm not your age, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you know, I think in this day and age, parents, you know, do want to have possibly a rather different relationship with their children than some previous generations, in that they somehow want to be, as I say, they do want to be friends with their children.
Yeah. See, whereas you didn't want to be friends with me. And I don't know, I haven't read any parenting books. I don't know how parenting works. So I don't know the psychology behind how to be a good parent. But I just wonder if, to a certain extent, being comfortable to talk about stuff also means lowering both guards for even 5 minutes, if that makes sense. Like, don't look at me as this authoritarian figure for 5 minutes and confide in me.
Yeah, but
I won't judge
and
you.
of course it is. It's difficult to play both roles, of course. But when have I ever judged you in the last 24 hours? No.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like, don't kids always think their parents judge them?
They probably do. I certainly felt that my mother judged me the whole time. You know, the anxiety for me growing up was not exactly a fear, but feeling as though you're constantly having to please my mother.
Well, I felt that way towards you. I always wanted to show you the good things, because I think because you weren't there, I was like, oh, must show good grades, good behaviour, all the successful things rather
But is that because you thought that's what I just thought was important?
I don't know. I don't know why, but I know that that's what. So then if something bad would happen and Mum would be like, you have to call your dad, would be like, no, I can't do that. Don't make me do this. I can't do this.
He'll tell me off.
And she'd say, but, and I think, and that's where I had to overcome myself. And it will be when I went to uni and lived in the UK, Mum would be like, I'm not there. So your parent there is your dad. So you're gonna have to call your dad. Sort of thing. And then I was like, and then I have to be like, okay, she's right. I'm 20 years old. Just get over it. you're not perfect. Of course, things are going to go
I am
wrong.
perfect. What are you talking
I'm
about?
talking about myself.
No wonder we have a problem. You clearly think I'm not perfect.
But I think, yeah, that it's also overcoming, I don't know if it's your ego or the expectations or ideals.
I think a lot of it's about expectations that you live in dread as a child of disappointing your parent or parents. I certainly had that growing up with my mother, not with my father, with my mother, this, fear of somehow disappointing her. But then if she was disappointed, she wasn't slow at showing it. And hopefully I've been better with you. Well, have I ever really been disappointed in you? Yeah, I'm sure there have been occasions, but
there's nothing to be disappointed of.
I was going to say, well, there is that time. Well, I don't think we should talk about that now.
What time? You have nothing to say. Literally nothing to say, other than maybe now that I'm a 21-year-old living at home.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's...
That's your Greek half.
I don't know if it's... I think it could be both. A, if a parent is very quick to show that they're disappointed, or very slow or not expressive enough to show how proud they are of good stuff. So maybe if someone doesn't show how proud they are when you do good things, you're like, oh, maybe I need to do better next time.
Yeah, precisely. Like, oh, I thought they'd be really impressed by that, and all I got is a kind of, oh, well done. Or not even that.
Yeah.
But I think what that also shows is that it's difficult being a parent. Nobody teaches you how to be a parent.
Oh, yeah.
Well, to the nearest thing you get, of course, is your own parents teaching you as a child. I mean, if you want to drive a car, you have to go on lessons for weeks and weeks and weeks before you're allowed out on the road. If you want to be a parent, you just start. There's no tests. It is winging it, yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't know where to start.
I know. Shall we start again? I tell you what, forget the last 20 years. We'll start fresh from tomorrow. And that's the problem. You can't reinvent it, if you see what I mean. And I think it's important, maybe if you feel that you've not been a good parent, or for whatever reason, that relationship hasn't worked as well as you. It's about the expectation. If the expectations haven't been lived up to on both sides, maybe it's time to actually own up to it and say, okay,
I'm sorry.
It hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked for these reasons. It's no one's fault.
We could try again. I don't see what's wrong with... Yeah.
Precisely.
I think it's kind of like overcoming that thing. So then I remember, for me, it was a big thing to call you if something was going wrong.
Okay.
And be able to say, this just happened, or this just happened, and this just happened, and I'm kind of dealing with this.
And, from my point of view, and it was very difficult being estranged from you. I really didn't know what was going on in your life very much. Most of what I gleaned about what was happening was actually more from your mother rather than you. And that wasn't because I didn't phone, I didn't Skype or whatever. It's just that even when you do that, you don't necessarily want to talk about it, or do you see what I mean?
Or don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, absolutely. And I can't pressurize you to sort of say, right, I need you to write a daily journal and tell me exactly what you've done. Because, I can't be there, so I need a report every day.
Yeah. I don't know.
But, at the same time, we've had the opportunity to, celebrate the high things together, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And the fact that something must have gone fairly right otherwise I don't think we'd even be doing this.
Yeah, but I think, as we've said before, quarantine helped because all of a sudden we were talking more about stuff. And I think me moving here, in general to the UK, I said, oh, one of my big goals is that now I can see my dad anytime I please, or more often than before, which is one of the reasons I was like, oh, I'll just come round for the week. And it wasn't just to eat and sleep and not have to do my laundry. Yes, that
Oh,
was a
really?
perk.
That was, sorry, I think that actually was part of the equation, actually. I think that really was part of the equation.
Or for you to do my shopping. But
I mean, you talked about expectations. Every time you came back for a weekend when you're at university, there was an expectation that there would be a roast dinner at some point during the weekend.
but I didn't demand.
No, I didn't say anything. I didn't use the D word, the demand word. I said an expectation. Is that right or is that wrong?
Yeah, but who set their expectation? I don't think I set it. I think both of us kind of enjoyed it, so it became a little tradition, I would say, no expectation. I think for me, it was also just being like, okay, yeah, I get to spend time with my dad now.
Well, I wasn't in the kitchen.
Whereas before, I'd have to, flying out 3 times a year isn't enough time.
I know.
Whereas seeing you every 3 weeks is a lot more than I would have had.
Yes, obviously.
And obviously calling you when things would happen also helped. And then you kind of be more in the know-how. And then obviously lockdown happened. And I mean, I'm sure there's still things I haven't told you, but I feel like now I'd be more comfortable. And I think we have discussed things more about times where I struggled or something more, whereas before I wouldn't have.
But I mean, I know you weren't living in the UK, and we get that, and hopefully the listeners get that. But do you still think that we could have done something better prior to moving to the UK to have had a better relationship? Or do you think that given the circumstances, given the distance, given the problems of communicating, because we won't see each other on a daily or even a weekly basis, that we did the best we could?
I think relationships evolve and change, so it's only natural.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, they do evolve.
You can't start from day one or expect a teenager.
And they can ebb and flow. The point is, you may have a very good relationship with somebody, and then it just goes down for whatever reason, and then picks up again
so
later
I think
on.
It's really difficult to assume that a teenager would be honest with you and want to communicate and want all of the things that we're saying right now as solutions.
So one of the things that also comes out of what you've just said is that things can always improve. Even if they've gone downhill, they can go back uphill again. They can get better again. Yeah. So never give up on a relationship.
Yeah, if you feel it's good for you and what you want.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I think also with age, I don't know if maturity and age has to play a role.
Maturity and age are not the same thing.
Okay, maybe I don't know. I don't know if it's easier to develop for some reason easier to develop a relationship as you get older with your parents, because you said that last time with father specifically.
Well, my father, but that was more to do with my mother not being around, because she dominated the parental relationship. Yeah. And obviously, I think by definition things change over time, for both better and worse,
maybe
unfortunately.
Also, I don't know, maybe because I didn't have siblings. Yes, I had friends that were boys, but I wonder if it's almost getting to learn the opposite sex from different views as you're growing up. And then...
You mean men have different views from women?
No, I mean getting to understand men. I don't know.
Well, hang on a minute. I mean, so that's a bit like suggesting that men can never understand women. I mean, there are certain things that will never be explained in life.
I think, let me rephrase myself. I think that I've lost my point.
It's all right. And I was being facetious.
I think I would say it's a good thing to know your parents. For example, I'm sure, because there's a big thing with girls, no, I think maybe guys too, like you have daddy issues or mummy issues, which comes from like your parents, what relationship you have with your parents then can be kind of reflected into your romantic relationships and the expectations you have from those, and then can come from gender relationships, what expectations
Right.
you have from males or females, depending on how your parents.
And I think the gender thing is very important. I generally have many more female friends than I have male friends, and I always think that that's unusual for a man of my age. I don't know, but most of my closest friends are women. And for that matter, that always has been. I remember as a child, the only co-educational schools that I went to was before the age of 10, 11. And I remember particularly being in the junior school, where that's when I was very first ever really conscious of gender segregation, in that all the girls used to play at one end of the school field or playground, and all the boys used to play at the other end. And I used to go and play with the girls because they were just far more interesting.
Yeah, but maybe that's because, as you said, you spent more time with your mum.
I never thought of it that way. Maybe it was. I didn't know. Maybe it's a natural thing.
So you're more familiar with females than males.
Could be.
I'm just hypothesizing.
No. I'd never thought of it like that. I just thought it's because they were just more interesting.
Yeah, it could be. Or for example, because I didn't necessarily grow up with you there, maybe I know that I sometimes get intimidated by some men.
Right. But that's again because, as you say, you haven't had a father presence, perhaps.
Yeah, so
and you've not had brothers either.
Yeah, whereas...
Although you've got male cousins, obviously, to which you're
close.
close.
I think it's having an older male figure so that I'm not scared, but don't feel intimidated. So I know that, for example, when I went to learn to drive, I said, I want a female teacher because I feel like he's going to make fun of me.
Yeah, or kind of bully you or whatever.
Bully me, and I can't stand for that. Whereas I know a friend of mine said, because she has, I don't know, a different relationship with her father, she was like, you're scared, like, why? I just take the piss out of them. She's so confident around older men.
Right. And you've never developed that?
No. If an older man says something to me, I almost, not believe it, but I won't feel comfortable or confident enough to necessarily fight back or speak back. Whereas she has no care. She has no kind of fear of that. And it's something that I realised, I think, talking to her, and kind of figured out, why do I not like this teacher, for example? Or why do I prefer having female doctors than male doctors, for example?
Sure. I prefer female doctors.
Okay, but that might be, I don't know if that plays a role, but I think it does.
Yeah. So maybe the parenting goes a lot deeper than we think. Because it has always, it doesn't bother me, but it's something that's always struck me, that how, some respect, for various reasons, I just get on with women often much better than not better, because I have obviously some very close male friends as well, but somehow I get on with them more easily. I feel very comfortable.
Yeah. We might be talking a bunch of garbage, because none of us have psychology degrees.
No.
And none of us have
But the majority of the population don't have psychology degrees either. And we're only just talking about what we've experienced. This is not about, something that we've studied over a lifetime.
We don't have, I think, to conclude this, because we have gone over time,
okay,
is that we don't have the exact prescription for a solution. But I would say, and then you can add on, two main things would be honesty, communication, and talking about the uncomfortable.
That's three things.
I know, but I added it on.
Accuracy. No. All I can do is emphasize what you've already said, particularly the honesty, and also being honest, particularly about your expectations. I've used that word expectations a lot. That sometimes if you feel that your father or your daughter or whatever it might be isn't living up to your expectations, don't be afraid to indicate that, because you can only develop that level of trust, and if you open up.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we said that whenever I'm not here, after lockdown, we said we'll talk once a week at least. We have a standing appointment, and I think that for me is part of my expectations, that I talk to you and you talk to me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I think we've talked enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
well, let's hope you enjoyed some of this.
Yeah, and I guess communication, as this podcast proves, I think that's the point, that communicate and you shall get a
communicate further.
Yeah.
Do we know what we're going to talk about next week?
We shall see.
Right. We're keeping it a mystery. So actually we're not being open or honest. We're going to keep you on tenterhooks.
Yeah, right. Well, bye.
Bye.
See you next week.